Nintendo is an incredibly successful company. However, Nintendo sued its way to success. Now let me preface with saying that I'm a Nintendo fanboy myself. I love Nintendo, but there's some issues here, and they certainly profited from it. Let me explain. Let's talk about some of the lawsuits that made Nintendo what they are today. It really started back in 1982. This is when Sid Sheinberg, the boss of MCA and Universal Studios, was looking for a way to get his company into the video game business. He heard about a super popular game called Donkey Kong by Nintendo and sent Robert Howdy to check it out. I assume it's called Howdy. His name is Howdy or Hadel or whatever. It's Hadel probably. Hadel? Sent Robert back. Hadel came back saying that Donkey Kong was basically a ripoff of King Kong, a movie that Universal owned the rights to. Oh yeah. Everything's coming up Millhouse, right? Sheinberg threatened to sue Nintendo if they didn't stop selling Donkey Kong. Nintendo, fortunately, bucked up on Universal and refused to give them any of the proceeds from Donkey Kong. Nintendo's lawyer, Howard Lincoln, almost caved in and paid the folks, but he instead decided to take a stand. After all, if Universal notices you gotta be doing something, right? Right? Lincoln instead doubled down that Nintendo had not done anything wrong and wasn't going to pay a dime. Lincoln and Nintendo CEO Minoru Arakawa knew that they had a fight on their hands, and, as they would discover later, an opportunity. So they did their research and prepared for a legal battle. Lincoln discovered that Universal didn't actually own the rights to King Kong. Oh, snap. And so he asked them for proof. I think at this point, the jig was up. So what did Universal decide to do? They doubled down too, man. They asked for more money. That's kind of crazy to think about. Universal tried to swindle Nintendo out of some monies over King Kong's infringement when King Kong wasn't even a Universal trademark. Besides, in the end, nobody's going to mistake Donkey Kong for King Kong. And so Nintendo hit Universal with counterclaims in May of 1985. The judge said that the cease and desist letters Universal had sent Nintendo harassing them about the game meant that Nintendo could seek damage. Universal instead had to pay Nintendo $1.8 million for things like legal fees and lost profits. The judge also was not happy with Universal for dragging Nintendo into court and called Universal out for knowing all along that they did not have any rights to the King Kong character. Nintendo had the choice of taking Universal's profits from the game or getting a set amount of damages. Well, they went with the profits and they got over $56,000 from this. So Nintendo ended up with $1.8 million in the pocket and a reputation that solidified Nintendo as a viable player in the gaming and entertainment industry. That's some pretty excellent spoils of war. And what do you do, kids, when war gives you excellent spoils? More war. So what did Nintendo do next to sue their way to success? In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Nintendo took legal action against Blockbuster over video game rentals. Rental stores at this point were huge. Why wouldn't they be? VHS copies cost an arm and a leg for an early movie, often hundreds of dollars, and you could rent these movies and enjoy them in your own home rather than at the theater. The issue is that video games didn't enjoy the same markup. Well, at least that was Nintendo's issue with this. Nintendo games were still $35 to $50 or so, and video game rental stores could rent those games out over and over and make major profits while Nintendo would still only have the initial purchase price as their share. I couldn't tell you how much money my family spent on renting video games and movies back in the 90s. It was insane to think about. I would imagine it was a substantial portion of our livelihood. So if Nintendo is only getting a very small fraction of this money that's flowing through the hands of rental places, you can understand why they would be upset. A Nintendo representative even equated this to being, taken advantage of. We can't say that word, but what? Maybe not. Maybe a bit of a false equivalency there. And at this time, Blockbuster was a major player in the video rental market, so they were certainly seeing the profits come in through their doors and in through their registers. Nintendo became concerned that by renting out their games, Blockbuster was essentially profiting from Nintendo's intellectual property without adequately compensating them. Now that's not a far cry, because that's kind of what was going on, but it was legal, and I guess that's what they were trying to fix. Nintendo argued that Blockbuster's rentals were tantamount to unauthorized copying of their games, which violated Nintendo's copyrights. The issue is that nobody else really saw it that way.
Boo frickety who!
Nintendo isn't the type of company to sit quietly though and allow others to profit from their work, so naturally they devised a plan. They noticed that Blockbuster had been photocopying video game instruction manuals to put in their rentals. Haha, we got them, folks. We got them. Haha. War's over, boys. Go home. Nintendo argued that these manuals were extremely important to be able to play the game, and photocopying was infringement on their copyright. That's clever. They ended up settling out of court, but you can see where Nintendo was putting the pressure on to keep themselves in profits. Though they were unable to stop the rentals, they did force Blockbuster to hire a third party to rewrite their manuals. And this really started legislation for Nintendo regarding copyright issues with their games. The big thing is that Nintendo wanted their monies, understandably, but this lawsuit also paved the way for their further success. So what do we do now? How do we step it up? How do we continue to sue our way to success? Let's see. Regardless of where you stand on the ethics of emulation, we all know where Nintendo stands on it, after they have made it apparent again and again. Console Classics was a website that offered links to visitors to download Nintendo's older video games, including the NES, Super NES, and the like. Nintendo sent Console Classics a cease and desist letter ordering them to take down the access they were offering to Nintendo products, as Console Classics was infringing on Nintendo's copyrighted work. We gotta turn off this phone first because it won't shut up. Nintendo explained in their letter how there could be a misunderstanding with how ROMs work, and detailed why their possession of and sharing was completely illegal. I guess they kind of mansplained emulation to Console Classics. Like Big Brother or something, Nintendo assured Console Classics that they'd be monitoring their website to see if they comply with the law. If they did not, Nintendo assured that they would take every step necessary to protect their intellectual properties. Get this, they ended the letter with contact information encouraging the website to reach out if they had questions. But after Console Classics complied and responded, Nintendo never responded to Console Classics' message. Why is this such a big deal, one may ask? Particularly if Nintendo was not currently profiting from those games. Well, let's say as an example, they might not have been selling copies of Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo in 2001, but they refused to allow anyone to share, download, or play the ROMs of the game online. This is weird because you would think that if Nintendo wasn't directly profiting from older stuff, why would they be upset about their fans playing it and finding means of playing it? Well, the story is in the business plan a few years later. Nintendo, recognizing, I imagine, the popularity of their older content still, sorry Pokemon, apparently Nintendo doesn't care, began repurposing some of their old content. The public started getting many remakes of older games on the Game Boy Advance, including the Super Mario Advance series, which included many different Super Mario games rehashed and updated a bit, and the Classic series for the Advance, with games like Castlevania and Zelda making their way back to the system for sale at retailers. That's a pretty smart move. They considered their competition online and started taking care of business themselves, profiting instead off old content that people were once sharing for free. Now, it sort of sucks as a consumer, but it's a smart business move, if not brutal in practice. This would also see rise to the Nintendo Wii Shop as well, and the many iterations that would come later. People could access Nintendo's online shop and purchase these older classics at a lower price. This continued through the NES Classic and the SNES Classic consoles, and is still going through the Switch online service. And hey, if you haven't considered the Switch online service, despite me dragging Nintendo through the mud here for a little bit, I really would recommend it. I have another video that's about the best NES games on there. If you want to check that out after this video, I'd really recommend it. But I digress. After destroying their competition and of course continuing to deepen their pockets by doing so, how did Nintendo still manage to continue to sue their way to further success? In 2009, there was a Zelda fan movie in the works. Since you're watching this video, you probably have a pretty good idea about how rabid the Zelda fan base is. Or maybe loyal? Maybe loyal is the term I'm looking for, but rabid probably fits too.
Well, of course I know him. He's me.
It's really no surprise that eventually, after clamoring so long for a Zelda movie, we take matters into our own hands as fans. Again, in 2009, a team of individuals released a Zelda fan movie they'd worked on since around 2005. It was relatively well received and followed the journey of Link in a story that was comparable to Ocarina of Time. Now, Zelda fans would clamor for this sort of idea straight from Nintendo, but to my knowledge, at the time, Nintendo was not considering a film adaptation of Zelda. Since their failed movie, the Super Mario Bros. Movie from the 90s, they had sort of shied away from making movies. And understandably so, despite how enjoyable that film is now, when you look at it for just what it is, and you can just appreciate it for a piece of Nintendo history. I digress. This video is how Nintendo sued their way to success, right? Let's continue. Well, needless to say, in an effort to protect their intellectual properties, they put the lid on this film. They actually allowed the film to be shown through the end of 2009, but after that, they ordered the crew to stop distributing it. Naturally, again, this protected their intellectual property, but the interest in this and other fan films at the time had to have some sort of influence on Nintendo, because years later, we got How does this affect them? Of course, if Nintendo allowed others to make films about their intellectual properties and profit from that, whether financially or by reputation, it would make it harder for Nintendo to. So, in putting the kibosh on films of their intellectual properties, like this Zelda fan film, Nintendo paved the way for their own successes, because the hype for a movie would be overwhelming. I mean, it's not as if the market had become saturated with fan films. So Nintendo stood basically uncontested. And again, regardless of how excellent the Super Mario Bros. Movie was, it was all the more successful because Nintendo prevented similar products from coming to market. As of the making of this video, there is a live-action Zelda film straight from Nintendo in the works now, and there is little doubt that it will enjoy a similar success as the Super Mario Bros. Movie did. In part because Nintendo, of course, will litigate itself into success. Objection! I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It'll be great. It'll be great. Nintendo is 100% litigation happy, and they seem to have only picked up steam since these events. So what else is there? More suing and more success. Nintendo is currently valued at over $60 billion, and it owes this in part to its militant protection of its intellectual properties and its willingness to get its hands dirty. And this is how Nintendo sued its way to success, at least so far.